This meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 65 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, September 26, 2023, the committee is commencing a briefing with the Minister of Veterans Affairs and departmental officials. La réunion d'aujourd'hui se déroule sous forme hybride.
Today's meeting is being held in hybrid format, and we have members of the House online to ensure the meeting runs smoothly. When you speak, and that goes for those here, microphones are okay, but for those online, please activate your microphones before you speak. All interventions must be directed at the chair. Before speaking, important reminder, when you have the floor, avoid having the earpieces to go too close to the microphones because it causes serious interferences and could cause some difficulty for our interpreters. So please be careful about that throughout this meeting. And in accordance with our routine motion concerning connection test, I would like to inform the committee that all witnesses have completed required connection tests.
We have the Honorable Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor, Minister of Veterans Affairs and Associate Minister of National Defense. Welcome. And from the Department of Veterans Affairs, we have Stephen Harris, Assistant Deputy Minister, Service Delivery Branch, Sarah Lenz, Assistant Deputy Minister, Chief Financial Officer and Corporate Services by video conference, Paul Ledwall, Deputy Minister, Ami Meunier, Assistant Deputy Minister, Strategic Policy and Commemoration by video conference also. And by video conference, we have Pierre Tessier, Assistant Deputy Minister, Strategic Policy Planning and Performance Branch by video conference. So, nous allons commencer la première ronde.
We shall start our first round of questions, and members who are used to this already know that I move around with my two little flags. You have 6 minutes, and when you have a minute left, I'll warn you. When your time is up, unfortunately, we will have to deactivate your microphone. 1 minute, please.
Parfait, d'accord. Merci. Et
Thank you. I would like to call on the Minister to present her opening remarks, and you have 5 minutes. You have the floor, Madam Minister. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for inviting me to appear before the committee today to speak about some of my priorities as the Minister of Veterans Affairs and the Associate Minister of National Defence. To be entrusted with this important portfolio is both an honour and a privilege. Je suis originaire de Dieppe, au Nouveau-Brunswick.
I am originally from Dieppe, New Brunswick, this small Acadian town that was renamed in 1946 to commemorate people who lost their lives in Dieppe, France, during the Second World War. Growing up, we all heard about the Dieppe raid and the sacrifices made by so many people in the name of peace, freedom, and democracy. All these years later, it's an honor to work on behalf of the hundreds of thousands of Canadians who have worn the uniform for our country in times of war, military conflict, and peace.
Make sure Canada's veterans have access to programs, services, and to support them when and where they need them, as quickly and as efficiently as possible. I am aware of the many challenges that Veterans Affairs has experienced in terms of processing benefit applications and getting veterans into the system. Addressing this continues to be my top priority. Comme mon prédécesseur, je suis tout.
Like my predecessor, I'm fully committed to resolving this issue, and I'm confident that we'll continue to make considerable progress. On the 30th of September, the number of disability claims exceeding the 60-week service standard stood at 5,433, representing about 16,000 fewer cases than at June 30, 2020. During this period, the total number of pending applications was also reduced by over 13,000, from 45,296 to 31,481.
In a reduction of the backlog of over 75%. But we are not stopping there. We will continue to explore all options and opportunities to improve how we support veterans and their families with programs and services they need and to which they are entitled to. Another priority of mine, Mr. Chair, is to ensure that our veterans are always remembered and honored for their service and also their sacrifice, whether they fought at Juno Beach or helped respond to the Swiss air disaster in Nova Scotia. Twice in the past few years, I have joined delegations that have traveled to Europe to visit Dieppe and other historic locations where Canadians have sacrificed and shed blood to defend democracy, human rights, peace, freedom, and security. Both times, I have to say, I was humbled to hear from veterans about how their combat experience shaped their lives, and I was honored to pay them tribute for their sacrifice they made on our behalf. En septembre, je me suis rendue en Nouvelle-Écosse.
In September, I traveled to Nova Scotia to mark the 25th anniversary of the crash of Swiss Air and to Germany to celebrate the 2023 Invictus Games. These two events reminded me that our military continues to face enormous risks that most of us will never understand. These soldiers deserve our solidarity for their service as we continue to pay tribute to Canadians who participated in most of the conflicts in the 21st century. And I would like to tell all Canadians and veterans that I'm determined to make sure that any veteran knows that we are attentive to their needs and attentive to their concerns.
Right to receive services that correspond to their unique needs and also unique experiences. And that is why that my department established an Indigenous Veterans Engagement Team, which builds on the work the team has already been doing to support women veterans and also the 2S LGBTQI+ veterans. This dedicated team, comprised entirely of Indigenous employees, has been meeting with Indigenous communities across the country. Since May 31st of this year, they've conducted more than 30 outreach visits to ensure that First Nations, Métis, and Inuit veterans are aware of the programs and services available through Veterans Affairs and that they are receiving the support that they need. En tant que ministre, ma priorité absolue.
As Minister, my top priority is to ensure that every veteran, regardless of gender identity, sexual orientation, or identity, race, ethnic origin, language, or religion, receives the quality care and support he or she deserves as quickly and efficiently as possible. Once again, Mr. Chair, thank you very much for the invitation, and I want to thank all members, and now we are ready to answer your questions. Thank you very much, Madam Minister.
One of our members, Mr. Shahal, on the screen, will replace Mr. Serai. Et saluer aussi tous les invités de cette salle and especially say welcome to all veterans in the room. And now we're going to start with the first one of questions of 6 minutes each. And I invite Mr. Richards to start. Please.
Sure. Welcome, Minister. I wanted to touch on a couple of the things that you mentioned in your opening remarks in terms of your priorities. One of the priorities you mentioned was ensuring that veterans are remembered. And we obviously, the pinnacle of remembrance in this country, and it shouldn't be the only time we remember, but it is the pinnacle of remembrance in this country, is November 11th on Remembrance Day. And that's a time when thousands of Canadians gather to show their respects, to pay their respects to those who've given the ultimate sacrifice, to show their support for our men and women who have served and who continue to serve. And in those ceremonies, one of the key elements for many people is an element of prayer. And unfortunately, there has been a directive that's come out under your government on October 11th that's indicating that Canadians will no longer be able to engage in prayer at public ceremonies such as Remembrance Day. Can you tell us what's behind that decision that your government's made, And why are you telling Canadians that they don't have the right and the ability to pray for those who've fallen and those who fought for this country?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Richards. It's great to see you. We sat on PROC together, I believe, several years ago, so always good to see you at this committee. I want to be extremely clear with respect to actually the question that was asked yesterday in the House of Commons. And I'll be frank, Mr. Richards, that question really took me by surprise and really left me shaking my head. I want to be very, very clear. There has been no directive that no prayer is allowed at Remembrance Day services at all.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but that is, in fact, inaccurate. I have, in fact, the memo that was sent, the directive that was sent out. If the committee would like to give unanimous consent, I'd be happy to table that directive. And it's very clear that it is indicating to their chaplains that they are not to engage in prayer at our Remembrance Day ceremony. So I'd be happy to table that at committee. But
Mr. Richards, I disagree with you completely on that. We've actually looked into this matter, and it's very clear that we certainly want that there was a directive that was given out by the Chaplain General with respect to this situation, and it does not say that prayer is not allowed at the Remembrance Day ceremonies. Actually, to the contrary, Mr. Richards.
Quite clear. 68% of Canadians identify themselves as religious, and 54% of them indicate that it's incredibly important in their lives. And to be able to tell people that they wouldn't be able to engage in that activity at a public ceremony that honors our soldiers is sad. And I would be happy to table that document with the committee. But let's move then, seeing as you aren't going to acknowledge that the existence of that directive, let's move to another topic that you mentioned in your opening remarks. And that is in terms of access to programs and services. And you've been minister for almost 3 months, I guess it is now. I'm sure you've had the opportunity to engage with some veterans, to have discussions. And I'm wondering what you're hearing from veterans when you talk to them. Are they generally happy? Are they generally satisfied with the programs and services and with the quality of service they're receiving from Veterans Affairs?
Yes, thank you again. With respect to my service, I've been appointed for almost 3 months now, and I've made it my priority, to be frank, to get out in the community from coast to coast to coast in order to meet with veterans and also to meet with stakeholders. It's really important for me to hear from them. My mother always told me, Jeanette, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so it's important to listen to folks on the ground, and I have a lot to learn from veterans and also from organizations that are serving veterans. I have to say the feedback that I've received I've received some very positive feedback with respect to services that veterans are receiving from Veterans Affairs Canada. But again, I think that we can always improve. And as I've indicated to individuals, if we don't hear the areas where perhaps that there needs improvement, we can't make those changes.
So you're telling me you're generally hearing positive, that you're not hearing a lot of veterans who have concerns about the quality of service?
I have not said that, Mr. Richards. Okay. You're putting words in my mouth.
Well then, let's get to that then, because one of the things that I'm hearing often from veterans is about a real lack of trust that they have with Veterans Affairs, and they tell us often that they're afraid to even speak up about their experiences. Because they're afraid that Veterans Affairs will retaliate against them and they'll lose benefits and services that they may have now. And so there's a real fear and a real lack of trust. And I'm wondering if you can, from your conversations with veterans, if you can tell me why you think that lack of trust exists.
Well, Mr. Richards, I think that we have to take a step back. And if we look at when individuals apply for benefits through Veterans Affairs, we certainly recognize that 80% of the people who apply for benefits through Veterans Affairs, and correct me if I'm wrong, Stephen or Paul, usually are approved on the first during their first application process. So Veterans Affairs Canada, when we are looking at approving claims, we want to approve these claims. The people that work at Veterans Affairs Canada want to be able to provide services to veterans.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Minister. Obviously we have our limited time here, so but really what it comes down to, I guess, is veterans need to feel that way, and I'm not even disputing that Veterans Affairs wants to provide that, but I think there's many veterans who don't feel that way. You often hear the term, delay, deny, die. That's a term that many veterans use, and that's kind of the feeling they have about what they're hearing from Veterans Affairs. So can you tell me why you think that lack of trust exists, and are you personally happy with the level of and quality of care that veterans are receiving.
Yes. In 15 seconds, please. We don't have much time.
Mr.
Please.
Richards, I really truly believe that any department can always do better, and being the minister responsible for this file is an honor and a privilege. And my commitment to veterans, if they are here today and listening, is that we certainly want to make any improvements that we can to make sure that they get the quality care that they deserved. They've served this country, and they deserve to have quality service from our department.
Thank you, Minister. And now for 6 minutes, I'd like to invite Mr. Casey on the screen to start. Please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Bienvenue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to welcome the Minister here. Congratulations on your role. As you know, this is a very important role. We are outside the National Capital Region, and I hope that we'll see you regularly.
It's too bad that I always have to do this, but I do. You were asked questions by Mr. Richards. He didn't like your response, so he interrupted you. So now's your chance to say what you wanted to say before you were interrupted, in particular with respect to his allegation.
Excuse me, I have a point of order.
Point of order.
Mr. Richards?
I think it's incumbent upon members to be to try to be accurate with statements, and the member is indicating interruption because someone didn't like the answer. It needs to be clear. It needs to be made clear to the member that there's only so much time that members are given.
It looked like debate. You have 6 minutes now, Mr. Richards. Sorry, you have your 6 minutes now. Mr. Casey, please go ahead.
I hope you feel better, Minister, that you're not the only one that gets interrupted. So my question for you is this. You attempted to answer Mr. Richards' question with regards to the directive from the department with respect to prayer on Remembrance Day. Go ahead and finish your answer.
Thank you very much, Sean, for that. First and foremost, as indicated, actually, the directive did not come from the department. I want to be clear. There was a directive that was put forward by the Chaplain General of DND. And let's be absolutely clear, in that directive, in no way did it ban prayer at all. To the contrary, the directive simply indicated that they wanted to ensure that the chaplains, when they did their public address, make sure that they were inclusive, to make sure that the veterans that are there, the people that are present, and also the members of the Canadian Armed Forces felt reflected in the spiritual prayers that were made. As such, I actually have a quote here that I want to read for the record, and I quote, "Chaplains shall endeavor to ensure that all feel included and able to participate in the reflection, no matter their beliefs." End quote. And I really have to believe that all Canadians would agree with that directive. I know that when I'm in Moncton, New Brunswick, and I attend my Remembrance Day ceremonies, we have the chaplain, we have someone from the Jewish faith, we have someone that gives us a moment of reflection. We simply want to make sure that all Canadians that are attending the Remembrance Day events, and I guess this is the directive that was provided by the Chaplain General, I should qualify that, to ensure that we are simply allowing everyone to feel a part of these services. In no way is anyone saying that prayer is not allowed. To the contrary.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Ministre.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister. I will now prepare you for Mr. Desile's questions. I imagine that he'll be asking you some questions about the monument to commemorate veterans who participated in the conflict in Afghanistan. And you mentioned the important role of commemoration in your remarks. I would ask a question about that. I know that there was a survey which was available online. There were 10,000 veterans with their families who responded and gave their opinions on the concepts that were being considered by the public. They showed their preference to the Simpsons concept, and the jury took a decision. From what I read, amongst the veterans, the majority, 63%, amongst the veterans and their families, 56%, and their families preferred the Stimson concept. So I believe that is something that's important to mention right away. But my question for you is, you know, you were invited to testify before the committee with the minister in charge of heritage. I'll ask you two questions if I have enough time. The first one, could you clarify who took the decision on the concept for that monument? Important question. We've discussed that a lot during question period recently. The question of the monument for the Canadian mission in Afghanistan started in 2014. The government at the time chose a place where the monument had to be set up. And since then, veterans were not happy with the location of that monument. Finally, in 2015, we came to power and we started doing the work that was necessary to find a place that could be appropriate for the veterans. So we started consultations for the creation of the monument. Heritage Canada came up with a jury, as you rightly said, and members of the jury selected several monuments. I would also like to clarify that we are blessed in Canada to have high-level monuments and high-level artists who presented their concept, so to speak. At the same time, the Minister of Veteran Affairs carried out a survey to find out what veterans wanted. Finally, the survey was sent, and as you said, we received responses from about 10,000 Canadians. The Stimson concept was the one that was chosen by the majority of veterans, and that is why we decided to choose the Stimson concept. Once again, veterans said it better represented the bravery, sacrifice, and loss of veterans. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Casey. Once again, I would like to call on Mr. Luc Desilets to speak for the next 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Casey, for putting me on the spot like that. Thank you, Minister. It's a pleasure to receive you here. I will talk about the monument. That's clear. You saw that coming. Now, you should know that it's usual practice. I say that for all our colleagues. When we are talking about public arts, the Minister of Heritage should work together with another department to prepare a competition and a jury of experts to choose the winners before we carried out a project. And in this case, as Mr. Casey said, the Minister of Heritage and Minister of Federal Affairs started the process and decided to leave behind the jury's decision to give the contract to another team. I think you are going in that direction, Madam Minister, and relying on the results of an anonymous survey online, an anonymous survey that was online. You should know that even the jury was informed of the content of this survey. They took into account that survey. Madam Minister, was the decision from your cabinet or from the Prime Minister's cabinet, the decision to put aside the decision of the survey? Thank you for the question. I expected that question here today and maybe in the next few weeks. What I find surprising when we are talking about a commemorative monument for the Canadian mission in Afghanistan, and during questions, we never hear anyone talking about veterans. We hear people talk about artists. We do appreciate the essential work being done by artists. But I am Minister of Veteran Affairs. My priority is to take care of veterans and to make sure that we listen to them. Madam Minister, I understand you, and I'm sure you'll do a good job. My question to you is that who took that decision? Your minister or Mr. Trudeau's cabinet? The decision to choose the Stimson cabinet was made by our government. The Trudeau government or your department? It's a government. Perfect. Madam Minister, are you aware of the fact that the Minister of Heritage asked for legal advice, a legal opinion following the government's decision to give the contract to the Dow firm? Are you aware of that? I was not minister at that time. Did you receive information that legal opinion was sought? I received that information from you when I met you a few weeks ago. You did not receive that information from other members of the department. Are you aware that the Minister of Veteran Affairs needed the signature of Pablo Rodriguez to authorize the authorization of the firm? I also learned that during conversations. Do you agree with that? Once again, Mr. Desile, as Minister in charge of Veteran Affairs, I would say that we have to take into account the desire of the majority of veterans who filled out the survey. For me, that's a priority. And I think that the veterans who are here today will want to know that the monument that represents the mission in Afghanistan, where 40,000 Canadians participated. Madam Minister, you are avoiding my questions, and I will get to the veterans. You know that for 4 years now, I've been working very hard for veterans. So we are not talking about veterans here. Do you know that the Dow firm receives a financial compensation offer for loss of profit? I'm not aware of those details, but I have heard of something like that. Do you aware that the process was not followed? Your government process. Was the government process tarnished at some point? Once again, we decided to listen to the veterans. We'll come back to the veterans. The greatest survey firm in Canada that does research, the Léger, proved that the survey was not really a survey and the results were biased. And that in that survey, there was no methodology. I'm talking about Léger, the greatest survey firm. They produced 4 wonderful pages on that. Do you think it's ethical to rely on a survey in such a context, whereas we know that the survey is not valid? Mr. Desile, it could be a survey, a consultation, a questionnaire. We were seeking the opinion of Canadians throughout the country, particularly veterans. That is why the Department of Veteran Affairs sent out messages to veterans using different tools. That's why most of the people were veterans. Do you recognize the fact that the survey was not valid? Once again, we sent out a questionnaire, a consultation document throughout the country because we wanted veterans to speak. One of the main problems targeted by Léger was that the same time was not given to people to answer. There was a 6-day extension. Are you aware of that? No, I'm not. Do you know that most of the people who responded to the survey came from Ottawa? Are you aware that only 12% of Francophones responded, whereas they represent 25%? Those are the methodological problems. We cannot consider that survey to decide on a $3 million project. For me, we wanted to listen to veterans who are a priority, and that is why the consultation, the questionnaire, whatever the term, it was very important to once again make sure that we will get the opinion of veterans and members of their family because they are the ones who sacrificed. Do you know where the Daouf firm came from? Which province? Which province did that firm? Quebec. And Simpson is from Alberta. Do you have any contacts with the firm? Because they tried to call the department and the minister on several occasions. I was open to meeting the Daouf firm. I spoke to colleagues and I said I had issued the bid and I was willing to meet them. Thank you very much for your interventions. To complete with this 6-minute round.
For 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you so much, Chair, and thank you for being here, Minister. I really appreciate it, and welcome to this new role. I really look forward to working with you, hopefully in a good way. I just want to acknowledge, though, in the audience that we have a lot of veterans here. It's really good to see that, and not only veterans, but of course, people who support veterans. So thank you as well for being here. And I do see that our Persian Gulf War veteran is here. So I hope, Madame, that you are taking this concern that I hope that you've been aware of. Take that up pretty seriously. And I also want to personally welcome Phil, who is here, who is a veteran, who has been outside of the House for the last few days and is actually on the 3rd day of a hunger strike. So I'm calling on you, Minister, hopefully to meet with him very soon to address the real issues that he has. I just thought I would bring that to your attention. So, quick response, because I only have 6.
If I may, Rachel,
Yeah.
again, if there's a veteran that certainly wants to meet with me, I'm more than happy to do so.
Excellent.
And we will make those arrangements if it's there. So
Yeah.
please, I will make sure that my staff reaches out to him, to you before that I leave today, and we'll make some arrangements.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. So, you know, for me, I'm always going to ask questions about marriage after 60, because this is a fight that I've committed to many veterans and their spouses that I will continue fighting as long as I possibly can, hoping for a resolution sooner rather than later. And I know, Minister, that through the chair, of course, that there was a great participation in my event for women veterans, and the minister was there, and the minister had a chance to meet with Madeline Landry, who is a person that I have a great amount of respect for. Of course, I know that Madeline shared her story, and the reality is, as she was married for over 20 years to her veteran spouse, and now does not receive any survivor pension benefits. So I'm just wondering, we know that the annual pension payout from the federal government is $12 billion, and according to the PBO report, eliminating the gold digger clause would add less than 2% increase to the annual payout. So I'm just confused about why this isn't addressed. I get a lot of largely women calling my office that are quite elderly that tell me that they are not gold diggers, and I believe they are not gold diggers. And I know that in 2019, $150 million was put aside for the survivor's benefit. We're now in 2023. This is a crisis, and I'm just wondering, Minister, when will you eliminate this clause?
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Blaney, for that question, and thank you again for hosting the event this week. It was important, and in my riding, I don't forget that I'm a member of Parliament as well and meet with many constituents, and I have also met with a few individuals in my office that, you know, are dealing with this situation. And the name of that clause, I even refuse to say it because it's just not appropriate. But with that being said, we certainly recognize that family members, spouses serve with their partners, and we certainly recognize that many of them are left in vulnerable situations, and we are committed to making sure that we provide them with some support. That's why in Budget 2019 that we announced the Veteran Survivors Fund. Now, being week 9 or 10 on the job, I'm still getting briefed up, but that is an area of top priority of mine. We certainly want to look at ways that we can better support our seniors now. And also the issue being is how can we identify these individuals as well? We have to keep in mind that many individuals aren't a part of the Veterans Affairs system, if you will. They're not a part of our accounts. So it makes it a bit of a challenge in order to be able to find these individuals. But we have to be up to the challenge at being able to roll up some type of program that will be able to help these individuals in their time of need. So I'm committed to making sure that we get that work done.
Thank you. And I'm sure that a lot of these folks can self-identify and give you proper documentation. So I hope that's done quickly. We need to get that money out the door for largely women who are struggling with immense poverty after years and years, in some cases, of caring for veterans. So, you know, I hear a lot about from veterans about how bureaucratic the process is, and there's frustration that they can't get things done. One of the things that comes up a lot is that, of course, they have to submit for a lot of their claims medical documentation within 30 days. And we all know in this country that a lot of people don't have family doctors. So trying to fit that timeline can be very, very, very challenging. We also know that the Veterans Review and Appeal Board have approved at 98% the claims for tinnitus and hearing loss. I'm just wondering, when are we going to get that automatic approval for this? This would really help with the amount of work that is being done in the office, in the department, I should say, and it would honor these folks. It seems a shame that they apply for it, then they have to go to the Veterans Review and Appeal Board, and the rate is 98%. I think if we have an extra 2% that shouldn't have it, it's better than not having a lot of people have the supports that they desperately need.
Thank you again for that question. And I certainly hear that when it comes to hearing loss and tinnitus, that we certainly have a large number of claims that are coming forward. And I also hear that a large number of claims, if they're not approved at first glance from the case or the adjudicator, and they go to the review board, a large number of those are approved. I think we certainly have to make sure, however, that the proper documentation is in place to make sure that we can determine if it's service-related, or at least there's some criteria that I think have to be established. But again, speaking to my Deputy Minister just this week, indicating there has to be ways to find more efficiencies within our service in order to make sure that, again, we can take that load from our caseworkers to allow them to do more of the casework. But again, that's an ongoing conversation, Ms. Blaney, because again, I truly do, like you, believe that there's efficiencies that we would be able to find with respect to that type of medical condition. And I don't know if Stephen wants to add anything or...
Sorry, time is running up, so we will have another tour, so you will be able to come back on that. Sorry. And donc, nous allons donc commencer un deuxième tour.
We will start our second round. The time allocated is different.
For 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome.
Minister, I want to come back to the trust issue, but first I just want to touch on one other thing. Do you believe that the Persian Gulf War was in fact just that, a war?
I certainly recognize that it was a mission that our members took part in.
But do you consider it a war?
Again, I'm not the person, Mr. Richards, to define if it's a war or not. I think we recognize that the Department of D&D is the one that makes the definition between war and special operations.
What's your personal opinion? Would you call it a war?
I think that all members that are serving in the Canadian Armed Forces are sacrificing a lot for freedoms around the world, and I think that all of that service must be recognized and commemorated and honored. We should thank them and honor them for all the work that they've done. And again, I want to add, I have several members that are serving in the Canadian Armed Forces. I take their service very, very seriously.
Well, we sure appreciate that, but I think there's many members who served in our armed forces who served in that war, and I will call it that, a war, who feel like they aren't properly recognized because it's not considered wartime service. And it even says in VAC's own publications that it was the Persian Gulf War, but yet they're not recognized as having served as wartime service. And that leaves many of our veterans feeling like they aren't considered the same way that they deserve to be. So I hope you'll give that some consideration as we go forward. Let's go back to this trust issue. Ms. Blaney mentioned Philip Brooks, who's here with us today, and he's one example of many people who I've heard from in terms of veterans who are feeling they've lost faith in Veterans Affairs. They've lost trust in Veterans Affairs to the point where, they're being asked to provide proof for medical conditions that are in many cases lifelong conditions. And they're being asked to provide this proof over and over and over again. And it leaves them to the point where they just don't know what to do anymore. Philip is on a hunger strike now because of this situation. And he's certainly far from the only one, unfortunately, that is feeling this way. There's changes, policy changes, there's procedure changes, and it causes them to have to go through and relive what can be pretty traumatic experiences they may have been through that have led them to having these lifelong conditions. And they have to prove these things over and over and over again. It's heartbreaking. And I'm wondering if you can address this. I wonder if you could talk a little bit to this lack of faith, this lack of trust that many of these veterans have. I've brought it up previously, but I really hope you're taking this to heart. So can you tell us a little bit about why you think that trust exists, and what can you do to fix that?
Well, thanks again, Mr. Richards. And again, I'm going to start again by first of all indicating that we have to recognize that 80% of our claims are approved immediately. However, there are 20% that of course will go to the review board. But I think we also have to keep in mind that there are some complicated medical conditions, and the adjudicators have to first of all do their work to make sure that the condition is related to their service. Sometimes, yes, there's medical information that's required, and that doctors...
I have to interrupt you there, because what I'm talking about specifically here is situations where veterans have proven that. They have demonstrated that, and they're being asked to do it over and over again, simply because VAC has made changes to their providers, or they've made changes to their procedures or their policies. So these are individuals who have proven that this is a service-related injury, and they're being asked to prove it again. And they're saying enough is enough. We're tired of having to prove this over and over again. We're tired of having to relive this situation. It becomes humiliating to the point where they say, I can't do this anymore, and I'm not going to provide the proof again for the 17th time. That's the kind of situation we're talking about here. That's what leads someone like Philip to be on a hunger strike. Minister, please show some compassion for these individuals. Tell us what you can do to fix this trust, to fix this lack of faith that veterans have in Veterans Affairs. What are you going to do specifically? What concrete measures are you going to take to fix it?
Excuse me, I'd like to remind members of the committee, so if you have, if you take 2 minutes to ask a question, you have to permit to the minister to have at least 1.5 minutes to respond. And for now, minister, you only have 1 minute to respond to that. So please be casual. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, or Mr. Chair. Once again, Mr. Richards, there are processes that are in place, and sometimes the outcomes may not be exactly what the veterans or the applicants want. There's an appeal process that's in place for that matter. I think that at all times we need to be compassionate, and we need to make sure that people receive the services that they need in a timely fashion, and we need to make sure that people...
It's the processes themselves that these people feel have the concern with. It's the processes themselves. They're not getting the ability to have the compassion that you're talking about.
Sorry,
so
Mr. Richards, I have a point of order.
What do you do about the processes?
Sorry, Mr. Casey.
Mr. Chair, you specifically directed Mr. Richards to allow the witness to be able to spend as much time answering the question as he spent posing it. He spent 2 minutes posing the question. He interrupted her after 12 seconds.
Chair, just to respond to that point of order.
Yes.
We're given an opportunity as members. We're given a block of 5 minutes to ask questions. And when a minister chooses to go down a path where they've either failed to understand the question or they're not addressing the question,
but Mr. Richards, I understand you, but
Mr. Chair, let me finish my intervention.
Let's say, I understand what you are saying.
To respond to the point of order before
I understand because we have to go on because
we have veterans in this room who are upset about the processes. I just want to ask the minister about that question. I'm doing it on behalf of veterans, Chair.
I understand that. We are on behalf of veterans and it's televised. I know that. But like I said, if you take 3 minutes to ask the questions, so you have to leave at least 2 minutes to the witnesses to answer your question. And stop, interrupt those interventions. So that's why I'm saying that.
Point of order.
Mr.
Chair, point of order. Could you point to where in the standing orders it indicates that it's required for someone to give the exact amount of time for the minister to answer a question that's been given to ask it? The member has the opportunity to use that time to get answers, in this case on behalf of veterans who are upset about the processes, and I'm trying to ask the minister about those processes.
Mr. Richards, let me tell you, you have 5 minutes to ask questions and to wait for the answers. If you want to take your 5 minutes, your total 5 minutes to comment or to say something, that's all. But, like I said, please do not interrupt. You not agree with the answer? I can understand that. But the witnesses should have the time to answer you. Please. So now it's...
Agreed, Chair. Let's hear your answer to what he's going to do to fix those processes.
It's okay. So, Minister, I only want to give you only 30 seconds to reply if you wanted to. Yes.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. His time is long gone. Through all the points of order, through his interventions throughout, his time is long gone.
Mr. May, Brian May, listen, I have my chrono right here, so I know. So that's my job. I'm doing that. So if I give 30 seconds to the minister, so that's what I'm allowed to. All right. So let's move on. And sorry to interrupt. So, Minister, please, if you have any comments in 30 seconds, and after that you can come back and another round to go further. Please.
Thank you so much again, Mr. Chair. We certainly recognize, Mr. Richards, that not all clients are 100% satisfied with Veterans Affairs Canada, and that is why that we can always improve our processes. That is why that we have our ADMs that are working hard to make sure that when it comes to quality service and to making sure that the investments are made to make sure that veterans do have access to the case managers, to their agents.
Can you tell us specifically what you're doing to improve the process?
Excuse me, sir. I just said that I give her 30 seconds. Yeah, no.
Chair, it's not your job to cover
No,
for
it's
the
not my
minister.
job.
Your job
I
is to
know,
just enforce
I know, but I said
Your job
that
is to
she
enforce the
had
rules, Chair.
30 seconds, and between those 30 seconds, you interrupt again. So please, we have in front of veterans. We are working for them, so we need answers. So 10
Exactly.
seconds.
We need answers to
10
what she's going to
seconds.
do to
Okay.
fix the processes.
Okay, now it's over, and I'd like to go now to Mr. Miao for 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Minister, and congratulate on your appointment to this file. And as well, I'd like to welcome all the guests and veterans. Really appreciate all the service you've done for our country. Before I start my question, maybe I'll let Minister to finish off if there is more to add to the previous question that my colleague have asked.
Thank you, Mr. Miao. Again, what I want to say is that we can always find efficiencies within our department, and that's exactly what I am committed to do. We want to make sure that our veterans receive the help and support that they need in a timely fashion. We've seen cuts made to this department, 8, 9 years ago, and we've established all of those resources back with respect to the staffing levels to make sure that we could accommodate and to make sure that we could review the applications in a timely fashion. If we look at the benefits that we've put in place, since 2015, over $11 billion in additional funding that goes directly to veterans has been invested because we care for veterans and we want to make sure that they get the help that they need when we need it. Can we do better? Absolutely. And we have to make sure that we do that.
Well, thank you, Minister. As you also know, the housing crisis is also affecting all Canadians, especially our veterans, and supply and prices continue to be an issue across the country. And as that result, we're seeing veteran homelessness persisting as an issue in many parts of our country. And I know that the government have announced funding to help address some of these challenges. Are you able to provide us with some of the updates on this program and how it will support our veterans here?
Sure. Thank you so much for that really important question. And I think when we look at homelessness, it's an issue that impacts us from coast to coast to coast. In last budget, we announced almost $80 million. I think it was $79.6 million in order to help alleviate the homelessness situation here within this country. I'm working closely with my friend and colleague, Minister Fraser, with respect to outlining what that program is going to look like. We've actually put out a call for proposals, and we've received many applications thus far from different groups across the country, and I'm looking forward to being able to making some of those announcements in the very, very near future. With respect to that funding, however, 2 elements that are really important. We want to make sure that veterans are going to have access to rent subsidies in order to help them alleviate the high cost of rents in the country. And the other part of the funding as well is for wraparound services. We want to make sure that for veterans that are struggling with mental health issues, substance use and addictions, or whatever the case may be, that if they do need wraparound services, that those wraparound services will be available to them. We want to set people up for success and not failure. And I know that being a past social worker, I've heard many of times that if we don't have those wraparound services, it can be a bit of an issue. So moving forward with this funding that we've announced and that we're going to be rolling out in the very, very near future, again, it will be able to provide individuals with that type of help and support they need. When it comes to housing as well, I think we have to keep in mind that we have to work with all levels of government, municipalities, provinces, and the federal government. When I became the Veterans Affairs Minister, I actually had an opportunity the first week here to be in Ottawa and to visit Veterans House. I don't know if any one of the committee members have had the opportunity to do that, but it's a not-for-profit organization that have built an apartment complex, and it is housing veterans. And on the first floor, it's more of a general area where many people can meet. They have access to wraparound services as well. And so far, that program has worked very, very well. That model, that not-for-profit agency, is actually hoping to open these other houses across, or apartment buildings across the country in 2 or 3 more cities that they've been able to identify. But again, that's a type of an example with partnerships with, provincial government, federal government, and also municipalities. Another quick example as well that I can give is the Surrey Legion. My friend and colleague Randeep Sarai is not here today, but in his area, the Surrey The Surrey Legion had a wonderful piece of land. It was prime real estate, and their Legion perhaps wasn't as active as it usually is. So what they've done, they took that piece of land, and a private developer came in, and they were able to establish a partnership, and they've been able to build a skyrise, if you will, or not a skyrise, but multi-level apartment complex. The first floor, the Legion is still housed there, but it's a brand new facility, and up top, there's housing units for our veterans. And also downstairs, there's a medical clinic. So again, it's not a one-size-fits-all. I think you can't have a cookie-cutter approach, but there's many options available for different folks across the country.
Well, thank you, Minister, and I look forward to have more information about those programs. And as we all know, our government has developed a lot of good programs for our veterans, and some of those in my riding have raised the concern of not every veterans are using digital platform, and they might not be aware of these programs.
Sorry, Mr. Miao, I said you have 1 minute left, but now the time is up, so you will come back in another round. Sorry, Minister. Et maintenant, j'aimerais donc passer la parole.
Now I'll give the floor to Mr. Desilets. You only have 2.5 minutes for your brief intervention. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Minister, do you believe that the jury that you set up, was that a mistake? Or did you make a mistake in choosing that jury? Mr. Desilets, what I would say is that I don't think the jury was a mistake. I don't think consultations are a mistake, but finally, the results of the consultation came up with 2 different results and the jury. Madam Minister, do you think the government has more expertise than a jury composed of experts to choose a work of art? I think that when we are talking about a commemorative monument for people who have fought in conflicts and in war, we must listen to our veterans. So in that case, why did you not do a scientific survey just with veterans? Once again, we decided to carry out pan-Canadian consultations open to everyone to seek opinions, and more than 10,000 Canadians responded. And this survey led us to receive lots of responses from Canadians. Once again, Mr. Desilets, I think it's very important to make sure that we listen to the opinions of our veterans. Thank you, Madam Minister. Another question. These 40.6% of people who responded, whether they are veterans or not, that's not a majority. Mr. Chair, we have motions. It's your time. Go ahead. I believe you received it. Are you going to read it, Mr. Chair? Do you have it? Conservative colleagues, do you have it? The motion states as follows. After hearing the Minister of Veteran Affairs, Madam Jeanette, and the Minister of Canadian Heritage, Madam Pascal Saint-Onge, about the controversy surrounding the competition and attribution of the contract for the construction of the National Commemorative Monument for the Canadian mission to Afghanistan, the committee invites to testify in a subsequent meeting following their visit representatives from Dahu as well as representatives from Léger. Free translation, the interpreters do not have a copy. We've just received a notice of motion. It's going to be circulated. Mr. Desilets, I consider that motion tabled as notice, unless others decide otherwise, because according to our regulations, it's just a notice, and during the next meeting, we shall discuss it. You still have 1 minute left to conclude your 2.5 minutes. Madam Minister, are you able to think that your choice to go along with a survey that was not at all scientific has put you against many communities, cultural communities, artists, and even veterans who may feel that that survey was not relevant, a survey you are relying on? Do you think that that work of art will still be there in 200 years and that there's no government in the world that would take such a decision based on such a survey? I do not agree with your question, Mr. Desilets. To say that the opinion of veterans doesn't count, I think it's lack of respect. That's not what I said, ma'am. That we are taking into account the opinion of veterans and their families, and maybe, yes, 40% of people who responded to the survey were veterans or members of their family, but most of them were veterans, and maybe they had engaged in other missions in Canada or elsewhere abroad. Thank you very much.
For 2 minutes and a half, please. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Chair. And through you to the Minister, I just want to reflect on the fact that in some of the responses I've heard you talking about efficiencies of services, and I appreciate that. But what concerns me about that is, to me, that is a departmental response trying to be ever more efficient. And I think the real human concern of many veterans is that maybe efficiency is impacting in a negative way the services that they require to have time and space. So again, I think a lot of the discussions I'm hearing from veterans is they want to see a department that's more veteran-centric. So I hope that that is work that you will endeavor to do. Now, I do want to touch on women veterans. As you know, the committee is finally studying women veterans. This is the first time it has ever been done in this place, which I think is quite astonishing. But we've heard from a lot of women veterans, especially older veterans, women veterans who enlisted prior to 2000, who do not have appropriate medical documentation. And the reason is because they were really new, and the pressure to not stand out, to be quiet and not bring forward issues because they were concerned about harassment, bullying, and other activities that were intimidating, and also, of course, the sad history of our forces in terms of sexual misconduct. The gap has been acknowledged by both DND and CAF. And so I am really curious about how this is going to be addressed, because so many women veterans are not getting the benefits they deserve because they simply do not have the medical documentation at no fault of their own. Retired Captain Louis Sue is here from the Navy, and I apologize if I mispronounced her last name. And one of her recommendations really stuck with me, which is to better support women by giving them the disability benefit claims and just do an automatic approval process because of the recognition by both DND and CAF. This would make such a big difference for these women who are often put in a place where they have to fight so often.
Thank you, Ms. Blaney. I just want to take 30 seconds, not even when you talk about, when I talked about efficiencies. I certainly don't want to sound like a bureaucrat, and no offense to my bureaucrats that are here with me today, but we really want to make sure that we can get the job done and to get services to veterans. I'll just use one example, and I think perhaps it was even the committee that had made this recommendation. When people are applying for mental health benefits, to make sure that they get approved right away without any delays, to me, that's what we talk about when I talk about efficiencies, is streamlining those types of processes. Coming back to your question with respect to women veterans.
Sorry, Minister, because it was 2 minutes and a half, so maybe that we have another two. You can come back on that. And now I'd like to invite Mr. Fraser Tolmie for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Minister, congratulations on your new portfolio. However, you've got your work cut out for you. I've heard firsthand from veterans and their families about how broken things are. You acknowledged in your opening remarks that you are aware of veterans trying to get into the system, which you have said, I believe, is your top priority. I'll point out that veterans that are not in the system are neglected and ignored. They feel that way. In one of your replies to my colleague, Mr. Richards, you said that you will address any improvements that we can. So after 3 months, do you have a list of things broken in Veterans Affairs?
Again, thank you so much for that question. Mr. Tomby, I believe? Yeah, I don't have my glasses, apologies. First of all, for the past 3 months being the minister, of Veterans Affairs, I've certainly had an opportunity to meet with stakeholders, as I've indicated, from coast to coast to coast, and to hear their firsthand experiences. I've also met with many stakeholders. And again, as I've indicated, we've certainly have heard many positive stories of individuals that have received services from Veterans Affairs. But again, I've also met with individuals that have indicated there are some challenges there. One of those challenges was the backlog. And I believe my colleague, Minister McCauley, when he was here, has reported back with respect to the work that's being done on that backlog. We certainly recognize that over the past number of years, we've had a 61% increase of applications that have come to Veterans Affairs Canada. We're seeing an increase in numbers.
Through you, Chair, do you mind? I'll rephrase my question then, Minister. Do you have a list of things broken in Veterans Affairs?
I've indicated very clearly that there are efficiencies and ways of things of doing better, and that's exactly what we're working on.
Okay, what is your list?
When we talk about the backlog...
Sorry, through you, Chair, could I get a list of what you have recognized as deficiencies, Minister?
If you'll allow me to continue, please. When we talk about the backlog, that was one issue that we've heard time and time again, and I continue to hear from veterans that they want us to address the backlog. When it comes to services and when it comes to...
Sorry, through you, Chair, what else is broken?
First and foremost, the language broken is your word. I'm not saying that there's things that are broken in Veterans Affairs Canada, but I'm saying there are areas where we can improve.
Use the deficiencies. Would that be fair enough to use that word? What are the deficiencies?
So with respect to the other areas of work that we really need to do is the area of commemoration, making sure that we commemorate our modern day veterans. We've heard individuals here today talking about the Gulf War. We need to make sure that we commemorate more of those missions of our modern day veterans. The other issue as well that's a priority...
Through you, Chair, Minister, do you have a list? Have you started a list of things that you want to address in Veterans Affairs while you're in that chair?
Yes, I have.
And what is on that list?
Tracking the backlog, making sure that we...
But you said the backlog's been addressed. What else is on the list?
We still have some work to do, sir, when it comes to the backlog. We have not met our service standards yet. I've indicated that 75% of the backlog has been dealt with, but we still have some more work that needs to be done.
Thank you.
Addressing as well...
Sorry, thank you. I think that's enough. I appreciate that, Minister. I'm going to ask you a question. A veteran confined to a wheelchair through a service-related injury goes in to Veterans Affairs and is recognized that they are confined to a wheelchair through service-related injury. Do they, in your opinion, have to prove that year after year after year? And if so, what does that do to their dignity?
My response to that to you is I think that we need to make sure that our veterans receive the services that they need, the compassion and the empathy that they deserve. With respect to the process that's in place, I'm going to defer to my colleague here, my ADM, as I'm not aware of all of the steps that need to be taken, and I don't have a problem admitting that. I'm not the one who does the arbitration of these types of cases, but I'm sure that Mr. Harris would be more than happy to elaborate on the process.
Mr. Chair, we have a veteran here that has, from pillar to post, had to prove time and time again service-related injuries that they have gone through, and they have to prove this paperwork over and over again. What does that do to their dignity?
Please, in 20 seconds. Mr. Harris.
I'm sorry, I was asking the minister. I was asking, what does it do to their dignity? What, in your opinion?
With respect to process, Mr. Tomby, I'm not aware of each and every step. That I want to be clear with you. With respect to proving their medical condition, I agree. I mean, if an individual is in a wheelchair, I do not understand perhaps why that occurs. But again, I would ask Mr. Harris to perhaps provide...
Thank you so much. 5 minutes, it's gone now. And now I'd like to invite Mr. Brian May for 5 minutes. Please, he's on the screen. No, he's right here. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't hiding on you, I promise. First of all, Minister, thank you for being here, and I do apologize for the behavior of some of my colleagues and the constant interruptions. I promise I will give you every ample opportunity to answer every question.
Point of order.
Excuse me, Mr. May.
Point of order.
Mr. May,
Of course there is.
Excuse me, I have a point of order here.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
any time that I wanted to have an answer, I went through you, sir.
Exactly.
And I was acknowledged.
Yeah.
I would like an apology.
I don't think I mentioned your name, sir. You're making some wild assumptions. That I was
You're coming
referring
right
to you.
after me.
So,
Yeah, well,
that's true.
I would
That's true,
agree.
but then
Point.
I don't
right.
get to
There's
pick
been
when
some
I-
wild
Guys,
I
assumptions
don't get
made
to pick
today.
when I answer these questions. but
Please, member of the committee.
I understand.
I know that the committee is always well doing, so I would like all of us to take it easy, to be relaxed and continue.
Thank you. I will agree, however.
Yes, please,
through you, Mr.
Mr. May,
Chair.
go
Thank you.
directly to your intervention.
Thank
please.
you, and I will agree with my colleagues' intervention somewhat in that in the importance of trust, and in establishing that trust with veterans. I was the chair of this committee for 2 years. I was the parliamentary secretary for the Minister of National Defence for 2 years, and I can tell you I spoke with a lot of members, both veterans and those transitioning to become veterans, and I'll tell you, one of the ways that we establish trust is continuing to support them, and one of the ways that we've done that in this government, of course, is reopening the veterans offices that the previous government closed. We also changed the criteria to allow more veterans to be qualified for the supports, and of course, the impact of that created the backlog, which of course you've talked a little bit about, Minister. But it's continuing that work and continuing on that path that will develop that trust. Trust is earned. It's not something we can snap our fingers and solve or throw money at and solve. It is earned, and it is something that we need to continue to work towards. Minister, through you, Mr. Chair, this is a new role for you, and I know that your prior work before politics was in social work. I'm wondering if maybe you can speak a little bit to the priorities that you have in this role, and the ability to draw from your previous experiences of providing service, listening to folks, and how that might impact your priorities as a Minister of Veterans Affairs.
Thanks so much, Brian, for that question and for the opportunity perhaps to respond and perhaps talk about a bit about my list of things to do and my priorities as I've tried to explain to the member opposite with respect to that. As you've indicated, the backlog is certainly a top priority. We've dealt with about 75% of that backlog, but it's not just the backlog. We are seeing an increased number of cases, volume of cases that are coming, and that's a good thing because people are applying for the services that they need and that they deserve. So we need to continue to make sure that we are tackling that backlog, and we can't take our foot off the brakes, off the gas when it comes to that. The other thing as well, when it comes to commemoration, I talked about it in my opening remarks. We really want to make sure that we do a better job at commemorating our modern-day veterans, and let it be the Swiss air disaster, the Afghanistan mission. The list goes on and on. We need to make sure that as a department that we recognize and thank the individuals, the veterans that have served on these missions, and that is absolutely a priority of mine. And finally, when it comes to the equity-seeking groups as well, we've got a lot of work that needs to be done. Ms. Blaney talked about women veterans. You know, that is an area of great interest of mine. We certainly recognize that we have about 15% of the CAF members are female. So we're going to be seeing more female veterans or CAF members becoming veterans. So we want to make sure that we have the appropriate services in place for them to meet their needs, because their needs are very different than men in some situations. Indigenous veterans as well. We certainly have to do a better job at making sure that they have access to the services that they need as well. Another area as well that I've heard a lot about recently is long-term care as well for our veterans. We certainly recognize that we've got a baby boomer generation that's happening right now, and some of them are getting older, and they're kind of wondering, what does that that going to look like for them? That's an area as well that I'm extremely interested in making sure that we see some movement there. And also our 2S LGBTQ plus veteran as well. You know, again, a lot of work needs to be done in that area, and those are the priority areas that I have in the area of interest that I certainly want to make sure that we can make significant difference. My background is a social worker. I was a frontline social worker for 23 years. I'm not a career politician, if you will. Perhaps now I am. But I am a lady who wants to listen to people. I want to build bridges together. I want to work collaboratively. And that is why that I made it a point to go out to communities and to meet with stakeholders, because it's important to hear from folks on the ground and to hear from our veterans as well that are sitting here.
Thank you, Minister. And thank you, Mr. May. And now, nous commençons donc un troisième.
We are starting a third round now.
Morgenthau, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Welcome, Minister. I appreciate you being here and answering our questions. You've mentioned the importance to you to do better with efficiencies, to improve things. In other words, to do better. So I have 3 things that I would like to just mention to you to consider. I've been on this committee since I became a member in 2015. I think I'm the matron of the community now, but I have a lot of good friends that are veterans, and they talk to us. So again, this is where we really need to go to get our information to how to do better. And I would say what veterans are saying is that they should not have to go through the effort of reproving the injuries and conditions over and over and over again just because VAC changes policies and procedures. There has to be a way for once they have shared and their case managers have their information, it's there. So any benefit of the doubt, any information they've given should be once and for all. So that's how they feel. I know that you felt that, I see that you indicated that you didn't disagreed with the report's finding on the new contract for the Administration of Veterans Affairs Canada Rehabilitation Program, where we found that there was a lack of communication and consulting with veterans. I can assure you that that is not a good take on that situation, that a lot was missed. And I think our veterans in this circumstance, after facing backlogs and then suddenly having this change of third-party services, was a mistake. So that's just my perspective from their perspective as well. Also, my understanding is the backlog is when a veteran's file has missing documents and they have to go back to the veteran, that takes them out of that backlog number. I would check that out. That's not accurate. That's not right. At that point, Veterans Affairs should be bending over backwards to help them to get those papers in. And then thirdly, we do have a case here today, and I would like you to answer to this question. Because of not wanting to go through all of this again for that third-party dynamic, and the case manager having all of the files that my friend here has already, he was threatened and has been informed and is in the situation of where he is no longer receiving his funding because he has not followed through with expectations when the feeling is that his documents are there and available to VAC. Do you feel that that's right?
Again, as I've indicated, if there's a veteran here that wants to meet with me, I'm more than happy to have that conversation with him or her,
Okay.
and to discuss that matter.
Thank you very much. And I would certainly hope that on that example alone, that every veteran who has not met whatever timeline is involved in this third-party agreement, that under no cases should any of them have their funds no longer provided until they meet that expectation. I believe that's Veterans Affairs' responsibility at this point, not theirs. Okay. How much time do I have?
2 more minutes.
Okay, 2 more minutes. I think I'll leave this other question for later, but if you have anything that you would want to share in that regard, are you aware of where files go when they're back in the veterans' hands, in that brown bag or letter sent to them where they have to provide more information? Are they still in that backlog list or not?
Again, if you permit me, I'm going to ask Mr. Harris to I just want to give you a thorough answer to that
I'd
question.
appreciate that.
And so thanks for the question, Mr. Chair. I'd say when information is missing in an application, we contact the veteran. We indicate what information is missing. We give them an opportunity to come back and provide the information that's required. If not, essentially the claim is held for when the veteran is able to come back with the information required to be able to actually go through and adjudicate the claim.
Okay, so if you
It is
contact,
held-
how
it
do you
is-
contact the veteran?
We contact them either by letter or directly through my VAC account, depending on how they've contacted us. And we may actually reach out to them directly in certain cases to ensure that we can get the right information from them.
So when you say we, is that their case manager?
No, actually, it's a different group within the department that does that. So it would be disability adjudicators, people who work in our centralized operation division who work on disability benefits.
So if we want them to build those relationships and that trust level with their case manager, would it not be better to have the case manager communicating with them?
Often the case manager can also communicate with them about that kind of program as well. They can work through their case manager. They can also work with our disability benefits team, who are more intimately involved in their actual decision with respect to a disability adjudication. There are many programs that we offer. Rehabilitation, more directly working with case managers. Disability program goes through a bit of a different stream, but all of those connections can be helped back through the case management group as well.
So I would think that we'd be better to have one point of contact so that
Except
it's as
not every veteran.
efficient.
Yeah,
as
not every
possible.
veteran has a case manager or requires a case manager. Some
Well,
may
or a
apply for
service
disability
manager.
benefits. Some
They
may
have a
apply for
service
disability
manager.
benefits and not require case management support. And so that's where we need to be careful to say it can't just be one stream necessarily. There may
Yeah,
be
but
many that are appropriate
I would
for
suggest the
veterans.
ones struggling with responding are definitely in the hands of case managers.
Thank you, Mr. Harris, and thank you, Mrs. Wagenthal. And now, for 5 minutes, I'd like to invite the Honorable Caroline Bennett, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I, too, am a bit concerned about the bullying in the theater around having the minister here. I think when Canadians or when veterans are watching committees that they expect us to work together and to be able to put veterans or Canadians first, not theater. And I am. It's been a while since I've been at committee, but I must say I'm disappointed in really the way some of my colleagues have been behaving. I would like to follow up on a couple of the questions in that the kind of paperwork, and I chaired the subcommittee on persons with disabilities for 5 years, and I know that some of the concerns were the same. That whether somebody has an amputation, that doesn't tend to change. Whether somebody needs a wheelchair, that can change. People can end up with occupational therapy. They can all of us be, regain their ability, their mobility. But I understood that the way the question is worded is, are there new or different approaches to the need for the wheelchair and those kinds of things? So I realize that filling out paperwork where they go, people are frustrated going, they know this, but how do you actually sort out, the fact that every 2 years things might change, and that it's the kind of, without making assumptions that things are exactly the same?
I think, and again, I'm going to defer to Mr. Harris, but I think there's some conditions, I think that we would all agree the condition is not going to change.
Yeah.
I mean, point blank. But there are some conditions that perhaps do. But Mr. Harris, again, if you would like to elaborate a bit on that.
Sure, and thanks very much for the opportunity to clarify. When a veteran has an established pension condition, they do not need to requalify for that pension condition. It's established in their file. They do not need to reprove that as part of the department's work in helping to support them. There are two reasons why they may come back and look for something else. There may be a reassessment. In other words, their condition may have worsened. And if their condition has worsened, they may come forward with documentation to suggest that it's worse, and they may need access to different or more things. They may actually also be entitled to more compensation. The other reason is perhaps their circumstances have changed in other ways as well. And so not just from a request for additional compensation for the pain, illness, or injury that they've suffered, but also additional supports. And so we often can reach out to veterans who have established conditions, not to ask them to reprove it, rather to ask them whether or not they're doing okay, and whether or not they need additional supports, whether that means additional treatment benefits, a visit from an occupational therapist who can help equip their house more appropriately for a disability or an injury that they may have, or other things as well. So there are reasons why we will speak to veterans about their conditions. And often it is not about reproving a condition that they have. Rather, it's about ensuring that it's assessed properly and that there are appropriate steps and actions in place to help support them.
Thank you very much. I think in the concerns that I've heard, and again, it was the same with CPP disability or other of those things, that how many are turned down the first time, how many are approved the first time, that in this 80-20, do we have numbers about the people who don't go on to appeal, or I mean, who just drop out? And do we have a gender-based analysis on the refusals, or the in that sometimes people have more complex conditions that need more explanation, perhaps?
I'm happy to answer as well, just as quickly as I possibly can. There are a couple of different avenues, and so with respect to disability benefits, an individual who may not be successful in applying for disability benefits the first time has access to a Veterans Affairs funded lawyer through the Bureau of Pensions Advocates, who will support them in their appeal to the Veterans Review and Appeals Board. Generally, the stats are about 30% of people who may be declined for their application will go through the Bureau of Pension Advocates and go forward with a case to the Veterans Review and Appeal Board. Sometimes they're counseled not to. There's not enough evidence. It's been determined essentially that there may not be a service relationship and they may not be successful. Many others, as has been indicated here, go forward to the Veterans Review and Appeal Board and are given a hearing and may be found favorable in those cases. There are other appeals processes for other Veterans Affairs programs that involve treatment benefits, rehabilitation, education and training benefit. And so if they're not happy with the decision that comes the first time, there are many appeals processes for veterans to be able to pursue to give another audience and have another opportunity for a favorable decision.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harris. Et maintenant, j'invite Monsieur Luc Desilets pour 2 minutes et demie, s'il vous plaît. Allez.
Mr. Luc Desilets, you have 2 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll continue, Madam Minister. Madam Minister, the survey, even though it's not scientific, it should just be a tool for the jury. And the jury saw the tool, they took it into account, but the jury also had access to a multitude of documents. And once again, the jury was composed of experts, the director of the museum, people who went to Afghanistan, and so on and so forth. Do you really believe, that such a survey, where we see a picture and we see a 90-second video, do you think that is more credible than the results of a jury of experts? Mr. Desilets, let me say this clearly. I never used the word scientific when I was referring to a survey. The Department of Heritage and us prepared a document, survey, questionnaire, and so on to listen to veterans. And more than 10,000 people responded to that survey. Yes, maybe 40% was tied to the Afghanistan mission veterans and members of their family. But once again, most of them were veterans, and that is why we decided to take into account their desire, because they said that the Stimson concept was a better reflection of the mission. I would like to add, I greatly appreciate the artists who participated and all the concepts that were presented, but ultimately we had to choose one. And for me, as Minister of Veteran Affairs, listening to veterans for me was a priority. Did the Prime Minister's office intervene? I don't believe so. Well, I would say no, but that's my opinion. I do not have a specific answer. We'll see later. I hope you have an answer for me. Maybe this is not a kind thing. I have the impression that you and the government are having veterans bear the burden of this lack of stringency and this lack of ethics by the government. Well, I'm the first person to defend veterans. I've been here for 4 years doing only that. Now you are taking advantage of them somewhat. The contrary, Mr. Desile. Madam Minister, will you change your decision? The decision has been made, Mr. Desile, and we shall move forward with that monument. We will continue the response later. Thank you very much, Mr. Desile. Thank you for your intervention. Now, Madam Blaney, you have 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair, and I'll come back to the question that I asked in the last round, and I'll get her name right this time. So retired Captain Louise Sue of the Navy encouraged the VAC to acknowledge and apologize for making it so difficult for women to receive those benefits and to put in place an automatic approval process that does not require medical documentation. So I'm just wondering if this is something that you would be willing to explore.
I'm always willing to explore and to look at ways that we can better our services, Ms. Blaney, for sure. What we have done with respect to women veterans as well is to establish a team to make sure that when we receive those claims, those applications, that we have a specialized team, if you will, who is assessing those applications. Again, as I've indicated in the past, we've had a lot of male veterans that have come forward. So this, the assessment process has really been based on a lot of those types of injuries that men carried and that lived with. However, when it comes to women veterans, we are seeing that the Canadian Armed Forces is making an effort to ensure that we can recruit more women, and as such, we're going to have more women veterans. So we want to make sure, again, that we have a team, a tiger team, if you will, to make sure that they can do those assessments, and to make sure that when we talk about gender-based analysis, that it's not just a word. You know, we are really doing the analysis to make sure that we know exactly how these policies are impacting women when we look at the level of injuries, etc. So it's really, really important to make sure that we do all that we can. And when I talk about equity-seeking groups, we have some work to do in that area. You know, that is an area for me that's of great importance because
I've only got a few more seconds, so I have to interrupt you, and I apologize for that. But I will say that repeatedly we have heard that women veterans feel invisible. So if they feel invisible, we need to make them visible, and I'm calling on you to do that. We know that a lot of women veterans at commemoration events are asked often if they're wearing their husband's medals, and that concerns me greatly. I'm wondering, is there any discussions about having an official acknowledgement of women veterans at commemoration services moving forward so that we can make, again, what is it so often invisible, visible?
Well, when I attended your event, and that was hosted by Monsieur Desile this week, I also heard that, you know, that women veterans feel invisible. And really, it breaks my heart because they have served their country just as well as, you know, their male colleagues. With respect to that suggestion, again, very happy to bring that back and to look into that, because we really need to make sure that women do see themselves and that they know that their service is valued, and that at Veterans Affairs Canada, that we want to make sure that they receive the services that they deserve, that they need, and also that we acknowledge and commemorate their service. It's truly important.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. And now let's get to Mr. Terry Dardel for 5 minutes, please, Terry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here with us today. I'm sure you're aware that on July 1st, the insurance provider for public service health care did a switch over to Sun Life Canada. And I kind of want to know, there's quite a few different veterans that are on that service, and I heard quite a bit about it at the time locally from some of my pharmacists in the area. I have Base Borden, which is in my riding, so a lot of people, as they travel throughout their military career, pick a great spot, usually with a great representative, and they'll stay there. So I'm fortunate that I have many veterans that are in my riding, but I'm just wondering how that transition's gone so far.
Well, I think as many Canadians, many of us and many individuals across the country have gone through the transition process. Some have been able to sign up fairly easily, and others have had some issues. I think overall, where we're at now, things are going a lot better, but there was some bumps on the road that we have to acknowledge at the beginning. I do have to say, though, that for those veterans who had not signed up to the new program, Veterans Affairs case managers or agents actually reached out to the veterans who had not signed up.
That's kind of my next question. So were they informed? How were they informed prior to, like, the veterans? Did everyone get a notice on that one?
Everyone received
How did they get noticed?
I'm going to let Mr. Harris make sure that he, and then from there, I'll continue on with the response.
So they received notices two ways. From the actual provider itself, Canada Life, the new provider of the Public Service Healthcare Plan. It's administered by our Treasury Board Secretariat colleagues. They also received notices from Veterans Affairs that this was coming in terms of letters, in terms of messages through my VAC account system that helps to enable them as well. In cases where we knew people had not signed up at the transition forms, essentially, we reached out directly to ask them if they needed any help, if they needed the forms, if they had the forms, they were aware of what they needed to do to make that transition itself. And so we made several efforts on that front.
Well, in my writing, I heard quite a bit that were frustrated. We have quite a few different letters from them that they didn't know they needed their medicines. One example here that it's $1,000 a month for their chronic illness, and even phoning the amount of time to try and get through to everything was really frustrating for those individuals. So I'm hoping that you can improve on that. I'm going to move on to something else that is we've heard quite a bit about as well, is how many people are working in VAC that that are there after veterans when they're finished their career. We're just wondering, like right now, it's 5% of VAC employees are veterans, and at last count, that'd be roughly around 171 employees in the whole department. I would think or assume that they're good jobs for those that are leaving Veterans Affairs. It's always good to have a good, steady government job, I'm sure. Something to look for, but I'm just wondering that number itself seems kind of low, and I'm just wondering if you have committed to a certain number to improve upon in order to be able to have more veterans work in the department.
With respect to the employment strategy for veterans, it's certainly an area that there's different levers that we have, and making sure that veterans will have access to federal jobs, of course, is a part of that the employment strategy per se. To your exact question with respect to the percentage that we have of employees that are veterans, I would have to defer to either Paul or to Stephen, as I'm not aware of the exact percentage, but Paul?
But you as minister would want to probably approve upon that number. I would think you would probably have some kind of thought process to get more veterans actually working within the department.
With respect to the employment strategy, it's really important to make sure that all of our veterans are not underemployed, but rather employed with the skill level that they have. And many veterans actually are not even aware of the level of skills that they have, the transferable skills. Yep. So that is why it's important to make sure that we provide them as an employer, the federal government, let it be at VAC and in different departments, that we make sure that they have access to those opportunities. Again, our veterans have a lot of skill sets, and they're able to certainly fill these very meaningful jobs, and as you've indicated, well-paying jobs with benefits. So we certainly want to make sure that that is the case. But for the percentage, I'd like to turn it to Paul.
Yeah, okay.
If I could quickly, Mr. Chair, the last number that I've received is 175 veterans who are currently employed at Veterans Affairs Canada.
But there's a strategy to get more because, like I said, they would have the skills
that
in the department, and you could actually have them trained almost before they come to you, depending on what part of the military that they're working under, right?
Absolutely. We want more of them employed at Veterans Affairs Canada, but as the minister has indicated, right across the government of Canada.
But no target? You haven't put a
There's no target currently, but we're very open to establishing a target. Absolutely.
It's probably a good idea to have a target so you have something to go for. How much time do I have left?
30 seconds.
30 seconds. Okay,
Yes.
just one other thing that I heard from, this is a kind of a lighter comment to everything. I know that many people send Christmas cards, holiday cards, whatever, and have free postage. I have a letter from a resident in my writing here, Judith Armstrong, that wants to send. Every year, the cost of stamps, inflation, as you know, is extremely high. Things are, the government costs a lot. Why they don't have that you can set, so like Sunnybrook in Ontario is a fine example of those that have served. Why can't they send those during those period of time to those individuals at the cost? Because if you send it, it's over $1. Like for her to do it, it's hundreds of dollars to send that to them, to bring light to them.
I'll take that back. That's all that I can say.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. And now I have Mr. Sean Casey for 5 minutes, please. He's on the screen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First off, I just wanted to clarify something that was mentioned in a previous answer, and that is the transfer of the health plan that was overseen by the Treasury Board Secretariat. I believe someone may have misspoken, and it's my understanding that the health plan was transferred from Sun Life to Canada Life. So if someone can just confirm that that is in fact the case.
That's correct.
Great, thank you. We received some fantastic news over the weekend, Madam Minister. There is now new leadership at the head of the Union of Veterans Affairs Employees. I would invite you, and if you wish, your colleagues on each side, first of all, allow me to congratulate Tufik Eldar for assuming the leadership of the national presidency of this union, many of whose members are, of course, constituents of mine. But if you could comment on the opportunities that presents in terms of labor management relations, a new era with new leadership, and I would invite your Mr. Ledwell or Mr. Harris to chime in as well. I know that they both have, I would say, more regular dealings with the union. But your comments on the opportunity that's presented by this new chapter, please.
Thank you, Sean. I'll be brief. I had an opportunity this week to speak to the new union president, again, to congratulate him on the election that he had this weekend. I also want to take a moment to thank the outgoing president for all of the work that she's done. She certainly had, a lot of issues that she had to deal with respect to negotiations and, a strike this year as well. So we certainly want to thank her for her leadership that she's shown. Again, I don't know the new union president, but again, spoke to him briefly and looking forward to working with him. And I'll perhaps turn it over to Paul and then to Stephen if they have a few comments.
If I could very quickly, Mr. Chair, I think that it's important for us to interact at a respectful and a productive level with all of our bargaining agents, including with UVE, our largest representative bargaining unit, on behalf of their members and our employees at Veterans Affairs Canada. We have had very engaged interaction with that union. We've also dealt and worked closely with the new president, who was for the last several years the national vice president of that same union. So we've been at tables together, we've collaborated, we'll continue to collaborate, and we look forward to a productive relationship with that union under his leadership.
Thank you very much to both of you. As you may be aware, prior to 2015, there were some deep and disproportionate cuts within the Department of Veterans Affairs that drastically affected service delivery, and certainly employee morale. My question is this: it appears that there has been a directive to look for savings. Much of the preoccupation of the employees during the Harper cuts was the continuation of the national headquarters in Charlottetown, and that seemed to be a preoccupation with the union as well until this latest change. What comments can you offer with respect to the presence of the national headquarters in Charlottetown going forward?
Well, Sean, I think we all know that it's really important to maintain the service level that we have, and the presence in Charlottetown is extremely important. We see that a lot of people from Charlottetown, from Prince Edward Island, are working at Veterans Affairs and have become very skilled at their jobs. We also know that the morale, as you've indicated, years gone by, we've seen that previous government slashed the Veterans Affairs positions by 1,000, and we quickly put we've rehired those individuals to make sure that we could tackle the challenges that had caused. Losing 1,000 employees was very difficult in the morale, and we've rehired them, and on top of that, we've hired 350 additional caseworkers in order to address the backlog. Keeping the office in Prince Edward Island is really important. We realize that people who work in Charlottetown, if they start working at Veterans Affairs, oftentimes will stay there for a long time during their career. And again, they are really able to hone in their skills and are able to provide great services to veterans. So again, there is no talk at all, I want to be very clear, at changing our regional office. It's well established in Prince Edward Island, and there is no plans to change that.
Thank you very much.
National office.
Thank you, Mr.
National, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Kissé. And now this is the last round of questions, and we will have 4 interventions. First from Mr. Richards, Mr. Miao, Luc Desilets, and Ms. Rachel Blaney. So I start with Mr. Richards for 5 minutes, please. Go ahead.
Thanks. Okay. Minister, I think when you're trying to accomplish something, of course, it's important to have a sense of what your goals are. What are the things you're trying to accomplish? And I've heard, I think in your opening remarks, you mentioned a couple of things that you're looking to try to, I think they were, I'll say they were somewhat vague, but I think they were things that you were looking to try to accomplish. And then in some of the questioning you've had, you've talked a little bit about wanting to try and see wait times, the backlog improved on wait times that there is, and you've had some chances to address that. You mentioned commemoration as something else that you'd like to see focused on, but you did mention that you had a list. I assume it's more than a list of 2 things that you'd like to see improved at Veterans Affairs. I'll put it that way. Can you give us a sense of what some of those other things are on the list that you'd like to see improved at Veterans Affairs, or things that you'd like to try and accomplish during your time as minister? Specific things, concrete measures that you're looking to do to address where there are problems. And because whether we agree or disagree on whether there's problems, I mean, there's no doubt that when you've got veterans on hunger strikes, when you've got veterans, some of the letters that I get, and I'm sure you must get from veterans that indicate some pretty heartbreaking situations, you must be prepared to say that there are some things that need to be fixed. So tell us what are some of those concrete things that you want to fix?
Like you, Mr. Richards, yes, I do hear those stories, and I've asked my deputy minister each week that I want to receive a sample of the correspondence that the department gets as well, and that's because I want to get a snapshot of exactly, what are the matters that are brought forward to us, and they're not all the good stories. There's some issues that that need to be fixed. To your specific question, to finish my response, when we talk about the backlog, yes, that's a priority. Work is done but underway. When we talk about addressing the issue of equity-seeking groups, Ms. Blaney asked about women's veterans. We have to make sure that we address those specific challenges when it comes to women veterans that are applying for benefits with Veterans Affairs Canada. When it comes to our Indigenous communities as well, we have many Indigenous veterans that have served this country and they have not had access or did not know of the services that were needed. So we need to make sure that we reach out.
I'm really loath to interrupt because I don't want to set off another round of concern but I guess what I'm trying to do is give you an opportunity. You obviously have had a chance to address these things already during the meeting. I wanted to get a sense if there's anything you haven't had a chance to address already that you feel needs to be fixed at Veterans Affairs.
Again,
you've mentioned some of these things already.
But as again, when you've asked me specifically my priorities, and I'm listing to you a list of my priorities.
Okay.
I think that your colleague also asked.
So I guess can I ask this then? Is there any other priorities you have other than what you mentioned in your opening statement?
With respect to my conversations that I've had with many veterans across the country, the issue of long-term care has come up a lot. With respect to, as I've indicated, we have many veterans that are baby boomers at this time, and they are wondering with respect to long-term care services. And I think that's a conversation that we really need to have. What is that going to look like for our veterans in 5, 10, 20 years? So that, again, is an absolute priority that we need to deal with. The other thing as well is the Veterans Employment Strategy. I am seized with that as well in making sure that we can get our veterans. As I said, I don't want to see our veterans underemployed. I want to see them employed with the skill sets and to provide them with the opportunities, the best opportunities that they have.
So what are some of the concrete measures you intend to undertake to see employment amongst veterans increase?
With the very near future, we'll be launching our employment strategy, and also with the help of the work that this committee has done, I'm truly looking forward to receiving that report. Again, working with the private sector.
Can you give us an example of something concrete that you intend to introduce, or
I will be rolling out the strategy in the very near future, Mr. Richards, and you will certainly be getting an invitation. How is that?
We'll anxiously await that then. So let me ask you again. It's on this idea of having targets. In the departmental plans for 23-24 under benefits, service, and support, there was 17 goals that were listed, and only 6 of them actually had targets or metrics that were looking to be achieved. Can you commit that in next year's departmental plans, when you have goals, that they will all have targets that you're trying to achieve, and that they will all have due dates by which you will try to achieve those things?
I'm certainly very really prepared to make sure that I speak to my team about that for sure.
Yeah, sure. I would rather have heard a commitment to making sure, because if you're going to have a goal, you have to have a target that you're trying to achieve, and you have to have a due date to achieve it, or else it's meaningless. And that's what I think I see that as now, when you've only got 6 of 17. So I really hope that maybe in the future you'll commit to making sure that you do have targets and due dates for anything that you're looking to achieve.
Having target dates and objectives is really, really important, and I absolutely take your point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, Mr. 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and allow me to ask my question again, Minister. So our government has developed a lot of good programs for veterans, and some of veterans in my riding of Richmond Center have shared with me that because not everyone is using digital platforms, they might not be aware of what programs are offered by VAC, even when they are eligible. What are some ways for those veterans to stay updated, even if they're unfamiliar with the technologies?
Really, really great question with respect to making sure that veterans have access to services, and that continues to be a challenge. We certainly recognize with the modern day veterans, they're perhaps more habile in making sure that they have access, to the digital tools that we have out there. But I think there's certainly more work that needs to be done. I gave the example earlier with respect to Indigenous veterans. Many of them live in the northern part of Canada, very isolated areas, and many Indigenous veterans are not aware or were not aware of the benefits and the services that they're entitled to. So some of the things that we have taken on is to ensure that our tiger team, if you will, of VAC, of experts that have been seized with the veterans portfolio, to make sure that they go out once a month in the northern part of Canada and meet with veterans face to face to make sure that they are aware of the applications and the services and the benefits that they're entitled to. Again, more work needs to be done. There are some tools with respect to my VAC account and the rest of it. But again, that is a challenge that's been identified, and we certainly want to make sure that individuals that are entitled to benefits are aware of those benefits that they're entitled to. I don't know if Stephen or Paul want to add anything.
If I could just, Mr. Chair, quickly, I think one of the key aspects of this is working through other organizations as well. We know that the Royal Canadian Legion is very present across the country, as an example, and is providing support and services directly to veterans to better understand what's available to them and better help them gain access to their programs. But it's not just the Royal Canadian Legions. There are many organizations, coast to coast to coast, who are representing veterans, working with veterans, networks, and getting the word out through those organizations is very important as well.
Thank you. And also, I'd like to take this opportunity to also congratulate all the brave soldiers and veterans who represented Canada at the recent Invictus Game in Germany. And we're very happy and honored that Canada will be also hosting the Invictus Game in 2025, because it is important for our veterans to be able to share their stories, and through sports, the Invictus Game is a way to inspire recovery. Can you tell us how the government support our veterans who participated in this year's Invictus Game, and also talk about the next Invictus Game in Vancouver in 2025?
Sure. Yeah, so this year I was honored and privileged to really attend the Invictus Games that were held in Germany, and met with many of our competitors that were down there and got to know them and got to hear their stories. I share this story. I asked one of the Veterans Affairs staff when I got there how many medals that Canada had won so far. And the staff didn't know the answer. And he said, "Oh, I'll get back to you." After 3 hours that I spent with the athletes, I quickly realized it wasn't about the medals. And I thought, good for the Veterans Affairs staff that he didn't have the answer to that question, because it's really not about the medals. It's really about seeing our athletes being together, supporting each other, sharing and bonding. So it was a very, very touching and moving event for me to be there. You're right, Canada is going to be hosting the Invictus Games in 2025, a $15 billion investment that the federal government has provided. I think that number is correct. 15.
Yes.
15 million, yes. And it's going to be, did I say? 15 million for M, yeah. But it's going to be really exciting because it's the second time that Canada is hosting the games in Vancouver and Whistler, the first hybrid games, the first winter sports that we're going to be hosting. So again, the athletes are really, really excited, even the ones from the Caribbean countries that snow is probably not readily available. But it's just a really great example that Canada, again, is showing leadership in this area, and it's a real honor and privilege that our country will be hosting the games for a second time.
Thank you very much for sharing that, and I look forward to see if our members of the committee can also join together to attend the Invictus game in Vancouver in 2025. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miao. Et maintenant, passons à Monsieur Luc Desilets.
Now, Mr. Luc Desilets, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, Mr. Yao, we want to be there. Madam Minister, you have experience on how the department works. How can you explain the fact that your department sent a letter to the winning firm Dow offering compensation for what you refer to as loss of income? How can you explain that? In what context do we do that? Why? Once again, Mr. Desilets, I think we need to backtrack a bit. The decision was taken this summer to award the contract or the prize to Stimson. The Department of Federal Affairs sent a letter. I'm not too sure what the letter is all about. Is the letter from Veteran Affairs? Maybe I'll ask my colleagues here to say a word about that. Yes. A letter was sent to the Dow firm. It's a process that is very normal when we are dealing with procurement for services in the government. Whether it's small or big matters, it's done. And that is what we did in this context. So is it not like a guilty plea somehow? Why offer the money? It's all about the process. This was proposed as something important. There were women, and a decision was made to offer this to Dow. I would also like to say that another irrelevant survey that you came up with doesn't involve any woman. You're only talking about veterans. There's no reference to gender, so we don't even know if there's a female veteran who participated. Once again, Mr. Desilets, I never said it was a scientific survey or questionnaire. We're simply seeking the opinions of Canadians throughout the country. More than 10,000 Canadians responded, many of them, majority of them veterans. We wanted to know what Canadians thought. Thank you very much. So we'll see you again on the 9th. I think we'll have this exchange again. I don't know what else I have to add, but we will be meeting and I'll be here. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Desilets.
From members of the committee is going to come from Ms. Blaney for 2.5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Chair. And I just want to acknowledge again and appreciate the Minister for meeting with my friend Phil. I know that he has no resources, and it's a shame to have a veteran starving on our doorstep. So I really appreciate and hope that it's dealt with as urgently as it requires. I do have a question about the Veterans and Family Wellbeing Fund. My office has heard from a lot of smaller organizations that their applications for funding are being denied. And I am seeing that a lot of larger organizations are receiving often very significant amounts of money. I'm just wondering if the Minister could share with the committee how the decisions are made and who is making the decisions, and if there's a clear criteria and how those decisions are being made.
We certainly recognize, Ms. Blaney, that the Veterans Wellbeing Fund is very much oversubscribed in many cases. And yes, many organizations apply for those funds. One thing is for certain, however, if those organizations want the feedback as to why they didn't qualify, they can always reach out to the department and get a bit of information with respect to that, is my understanding. Mr. Harris, perhaps, or Paul? Sorry, go ahead.
As the minister's indicated, there is an oversubscription on the program, but it has also been very, very successful. And I would say that there's been quite a mix of very small, focused, localized organizations and some larger organizations that are working on a pan-Canadian basis. Really, the effort is about finding supports for key issues around women's health, around homelessness, around
I only have another less than a minute.
And there is a process, a very clear process to come to terms on every application that comes in.
Thank you. So a proposal did come to the minister's office back in June from a group that's working on a project called the Burns Way. They haven't heard anything back, and I have met with the group, and it sounds like their project really focuses on connecting veterans to veterans, and I think that is something that is incredibly important. I'm just wondering, will they hear back, and I hope the minister will meet with them to discuss how this might be a project that could move forward.
I'll certainly ask my officials, Ms. Blaney, to follow up on that application. I really don't have any of the details surrounding that application, but we'll certainly follow up. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Madame Blaney. And how shall I say, I heard a few times, Madame Minister, saying that you would be coming back. So if there's anything, please send it to our staff. Yes, I can't wait.
As well that are in the room here today. I know it's been a long 2 hours, but I just, again, want to thank them and to thank them for their service.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Et sur ce, je voudrais...
And on that, I also want to thank you for being here. And allow me to thank you before you leave. Ladies and gentlemen, we had the Minister, the Honorable Ginette Petitpas-Taylor, Veterans Affairs and National Defense, and she was with Mr. Stephen Harris, Deputy Minister, Service Delivery, and Madame Sarah Lenz, Finances and Ministerial Services, Mr. Paul Ledwell, Deputy Minister Ami Meunier, Political Strategies and Commemoration, and Pierre Tessier, Assistant Deputy Minister, Strategic Policy Planning and Performance. I also want to tell the members of the committee that next week we will resume with a study on women veterans' experience. You have witnesses, and on this, yes, Mr. Richards?
It's been mentioned a couple times about the minister's appearance along with the Minister of Heritage, which I think is due based on the motion by mid-November or something. Do we have any update on when those ministers will be appearing together?
The clerk is in contact with...
We do have the Minister of Veterans Affairs here. Maybe they could give she could get some indication when she's available now.
Okay, the clerk will get in touch with those ministers in order to have that motion that we adopted to do this meeting. So, plaît-il aux membres du comité d'adjournement?
Is it your pleasure to adjourn the meeting? No objection? Meeting is adjourned. you.